Hello, welcome to the latest edition of Data in the Hallway. My name is Ray Pate, Community Manager at PingCAP, joined by my co-host and coworker, Daniel Van Eden, joining us from the
Hello.
Netherlands. Hi, Daniel, how are you? Oh,
Good, you?
cool, thanks. Yeah, I'm doing well as well. Today we're honored to have Stefano Maffulli, who is the Executive Director at OSI, our open source initiative, and we're dating ourselves, Stefano. I think we've known each other like 9 to 10 years. It makes us feel old, but we crossed
Yeah,
paths a number of times, so it's good to reconnect. And today's topic is about, I mean, everybody these days is talking about AI, and AI obviously is a popular conversation amongst open source developers too. So we want to talk about the definition of open source AI that you've been sort of spearheading, Stefano. So first of all, like if you want to introduce yourself real quickly
yeah,
and tell us about OSI, like what is open source initiative
absolutely.
for people who are not familiar.
Yeah,
So
yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for having me. This is so much
yeah,
fun. It's a Friday evening. It's a nice way to complete the week. I'm based in Europe too. I'm
yeah,
in Italy right now.
uh,
So I'm Stefano Maffulli. I started 3 years ago at the Open Source Initiative, and the organization is probably very well. I mean, not probably, but I'm sure that a lot of your readers, a lot of your audience is familiar with the logo, the keyhole, and the green image that goes with it, and the term open source. Like the organization has been around for 26 years. It's very well regarded as an independent organization, nonprofit based in the United States with a global footprint and tasked with by the community, tasked with maintaining the definition of open source and use that definition of open source to evaluate software licenses so that they developers and lawyers and large corporations and small corporations, they have immediate understanding of the rights that they have when they load a software package with shipped with a license that is approved by the open source definition. Very quickly, the principles of open source are the same principles of the free software movement. That means that any software package that you receive with the licenses approved by the OSI have given the users the same rights that the original developers have. They have the right to use it, to modify it, to ship it to others, and to charge for it also without any exclusivity given to the original developers. And that's pretty much it for 20 plus years until I joined, or until rather the board decided to turn the organization into a professionally run organization, because the world around open source and around the open source initiative, the whole ecosystem has changed and evolved, and it became much more important. It's according to a study by Harvard researcher, it's the whole ecosystem and the value of the software packages shipped with open source approved licenses is worth $8.8 trillion. And that's a massive amount of money. If you think about it, it's 3 times the market capitalization of Microsoft. So the two ecosystems are vastly different. So with that maturity, with that importance, the board decided 3 years ago to turn the organization into a professional one. What does it mean? It means to have an executive director, but also staff that runs programs that reach out to other to reach out to follows programs that are basically taking that responsibility with the ecosystem. Right? What things that were happening and are still happening in the past years, especially have been happening in the policy world. Like we've seen that this $8.8 trillion ecosystem is extremely vulnerable because it's pervasive. It's extremely vulnerable to security issues, to geopolitical threats. The landscape is completely different. And then there is new technologies being introduced, like AI that you mentioned is one of the examples. But in the past, we had other technologies that have change a little bit the landscape, impacting the value of open source. And that's what we're trying to do. Now we have 3 solid and established programs. One is if you want, the classic activity on licenses, maintaining the list of licenses. And inside that program, we also have a project we steward, a community project called Clearly Defined, to help the compliance management system and the whole supply chain and environments. The other program, the second program, is a policy program, which is also the bulk of our staff. We have now 3 people in this team and 1 open position. So the plan is to have by the end of the Q1 2025 to have 4 people in this program. And in this is split between activities in Europe and the United States. And the reason for this, we can go into details, is because regulators are finally paying attention. We've been asking them to pay attention to open source. Now they're actually paying attention to open source. And that changes a lot the landscape. And the third program is the advocacy and outreach program, because it's in our spirit and in our mission and objective to be educating the public in general about the values of open source. And in this space, we have conferences, we host podcasts, we have forum discussions, and we've also incubated in this program the research around the definition of open source for AI. And that's the intro.
No, that's a great overview. I mean, even preempted some of my questions about, what are the criteria of being an open source software or to be called like open source licenses. So that's great. So I love it when like a guest sort of preempt our questions. And I think like people that are even casually looking at open source, I mean, I think familiar with the term OSI approved open source licenses. Like we had our hackathon earlier this year, and one of the prizes was like, for best open source, like, submissions. And, we use the same term, like you need to use software that are, using OSI approved licenses, right, that are recognized as licenses. Because I think there's a confusion in terms of, as long as you can see open source, people think that's all there is to it, but it's not. Like there are other criteria, like you mentioned, right? So, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Usually it's a fairly simple. Is this software open source or not? The answer is usually pretty simple. Look at the license. If the license is one approved by the OSI, then chances are that you can definitely do what you want with that package. Right. Now, whether it's complete, whether it's a good package, whether it's well maintained, whether it's whether it's secure, that is a different story, right? That is something that you may want to interpret. You may want as a procurement officer or simply as a user. If you want to trust it, that is a different story. But at least that you have access to the source code and you should have all the rights to use and modify and ship. Right.
Yeah, I think people forget that additional like rights in terms of like a modification and shipping. Like as long as you can see the source code, there's all there is to it. But there are other like
you have to have the rights.
Yeah, people have like used different terms, like different open source projects or communities. I think some call them like 4 opens, right? I mean, one of them is source code, but there are other openness that are required of your project and the community, right? So, so obvious, like, like a lot of people are familiar with or looked at OSI as sort of a steward of like an open source definition for software. So the question is, what makes AI different than like a traditional software? Because initial reaction is, well, I'm writing on AI software. Isn't the existing, OSI definition of licenses adequate? Because like you said, since 1998, like the last 26 years, you've been sort of, stewards of the definition of open source. But what makes AI different and what's unique?
That's a very good question. It's a very common one also. Like I've heard it multiple times. But I like to tell this story because it really resonated. What resonated with me, and the reason why we have triggered the investigation on AI. And the story was I don't know if you remember, a couple of years ago, a little over a couple of years ago, there was a story in the New York Times reporting of a father who took a picture of his child naked because he had some sort of rash near his genitals, and he sent the picture to the doctors, and automatically the chat system flagged that user as a pedophile and blocked the account. And then, of course, once you have, especially this was a Google account, but it could have been any other account. Like, things got complicated. Like, how do I get unlocked, or why am I flagged automatically? Right. And I've been around open source for all my professional career. Basically, as soon as I graduated, I was already advocating for open source, and I was calling it software libero because I was doing it in Italy. So I was using the term free software as in freedom rather than open source. But I've been doing it quite a lot. And I remember that during the very first years of the internet development and all the early stage public administrations where they were going online and on the internet putting services, we were insisting, we collectively as advocates of free software, we were pushing for the public administration to use to reclaim and to make sure that the software that they were using to give e-citizen, electronic citizenship services were free software or open source, because we needed collectively as society to be able to have the ability, the knowledge, the tools, the rights to do whatever we wanted as society. And we knew that, because one of the arguments that we were using was, if you have access to the source code and the tools to build the software, then, and the rights to build the software, then you can fix things. You can create a local economy that supports your e-citizenship programs, et cetera, et cetera. So to go back to the kid and the father snapping pictures, the question that came to my mind is, wait, these systems, these AI machines, they're not programmed. There is no source code. They're not deterministic. There is no human telling them to say, this picture is good, this other picture is bad. They learned by themselves. So what should we tell policymakers? Like, have access to X. What is that? How do you fix an AI that has a bug? An AI like that one, image recognition one that has a bug, and so how do you fix it? We didn't have the question, and I started asking around to friends and other people with expertise in the field. They were just like, well, it's complicated. I'm like, all right, sounds like this is something that we'll soon be asked to provide an answer for, and we better get up now off of our chairs and start searching for an answer, even if it's a wrong one, even if it's imprecise, even if it's partial answer. At least we need to have a story to tell, and not like, I don't know, you figure it out. Because if you say, I don't know, it was very clear someone else would have done it. And maybe we would have not liked the answer. So we started. So we set up a program to take a step back, take really a long step back and say, okay, this doesn't look at all like any of the software packages, none of the things that we have that we're familiar with. The more we dove into, we started with a series of interviews that we published as podcasts with experts in copyright, experts in security, in AI building, in data scientists, and ethics, because there is a lot of convoluted facets to this space, and we wanted to get a better idea of what we were getting into, and then it was clear, like, we needed to provide an answer, because at the same as we were moving forward with this, like, what does AI look like? What is it? How do you fix a bug? And how do you fix? What do you tell a regulator that we as society need to have access to? It became clear that the regulators were already writing rules and laws. like the AI Act, the cybersecurity, the executive order by the Biden administration on AI, they were all pushing to say, look, this is important. We need to regulate it. And as they were regulating, because we've been so good at telling regulators that open source is a special kind and it needs to be safeguarded because it's a driver for innovation, etc., they were carving out special provisions for what they vaguely mention as open source and free and open source AI systems. And we better come up with an answer, because otherwise someone else would have provided an answer for them to define.
So I think it's maybe this is too simplistic, but I think the challenge, like I'll use the term AI system, like you were saying, the AI system not just consists of like source code or just traditional like a packaged software, if you will, but it includes like other things like data and like LLMs that's included in whatever that AI system is doing, right? Whether it's like a recognizing images or whatever, it's not just code that's the key, that consists of an AI system. There are other things like data and other things that come into play. Is that sort of fair way to characterize it, or?
Yeah, right. So, definitely, we discovered very early on that this was going to be complicated, but we put some criteria. We as OSI, after the interviews, after getting the feeling from community members of various stakeholders and various interest groups, they all said the same thing. We need some clarity, because open washing is rampant, and open washing meaning companies or other interest groups or just regular people on the internet, they were using the term open source AI, using and abusing, and they were attaching it to all kinds of different things, and there was no clarity, and that with clarity comes abuse. So we needed to come up with some clarity. We needed to call it open source AI. We needed to find a definition for open source AI, because that was the term that everyone was using already without defining it, including the early drafts of the AI Act in Europe. We needed to have these conversations, and what we discovered is, as you were saying, that we also needed to find an anchor about what we were talking about, like AI. What is an AI system? And find out. I mean, it's a funny story. Funny, like not funny, but it's to the level of what complexity there is in the space. The definition of AI and AI system is fluctuating, and it's, as a research field, is quite old. It's not, it was not invented at Google 5 years ago. It's much longer, much older. But the definition of AI system that went into the AI Act in its final form is of November 2023. And so, basically what we're talking about is a system that can infer an output given an input. There is, the output could be predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions that can influence the physical or virtual environments. Think of the decision for an arm robot to pick a red ball instead of a blue one, right? That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. So with that, we started from there. Like, what is it that we are talking about? And we used this definition. We also found out very, very early on that the main building blocks of these systems, and we were really referring to large language models, because they were, OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, and everyone was talking about it. Not only that, talking about it, it was being adopted. One of the most popular, more quickly adopted software package or even product, in the history of humankind, probably. Like, I don't know, but I read stories like that. So the building blocks are three mainly. There is hardware that you need money to buy. There is knowledge, for which you need time and money, right? You need to hire talents and maybe, or learn. how to build clusters, for example. It's non-trivial to build clusters of GPUs and connect them so that there is low latency between your storage clusters to the training clusters. And then finally, the third thing is where the data they seem to require an incredible amount of data, and that's a function again of money, of time. But also, it's complicated landscape from the legal perspective because a lot of laws that are absolutely not uniformly adopted or applied in different parts of the world gravitate around data. So we decided to focus on this part and consider the hardware and the knowledge piece as out of scope for our conversation. So data is where we focused on. And we also needed to act with urgency. I've heard people, some people are like, why, there was a comment from Bradley Kuhn, who's a smart thinker, and he was like, well, I don't have an answer for, I don't have a lot of answers, but I think that time will tell us. Like, well, if you let 10 years pass without you providing a definition, then someone else will provide it for you. Because clearly the AI Act wants one, right? So just that means that you need to come up with something, even though it's wrong, even though it may be wrong, even though it's again imprecise, even though it will have to be fixed later on. You still have to put a stake in the ground, and that's what we did.
Okay. Yeah. So like you say, AI as a research area has been around for decades, but with the popularity of like use cases and applications that are proliferating recently, lack of definition of what an AI app or system is, and then it just requires a lot more things beyond software, like beyond code. So like you mentioned hardware, data, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I can see where the it just becomes much more complicated than traditional software that you were defining in terms of what is open source. So what's been sort of the process? I think I haven't followed this intimately, but I think this is a journey that you took on like a couple of years ago. What was the process? Who was involved? And I assume both of us worked at different foundations. One of the challenges at foundation is that bringing disparate group people together and coming to a consensus isn't easy. Because we're all people, we have all strong opinions. But sort of what's been the process like over the past few years and when you got started? So.
It's been quite a journey. Like you were saying, you're right. It's been it took us quite a lot of time. As I said, we started with getting our bearings, right? Trying to understand the lay of the land and what we were actually talking about. And the first decision was to say we need to have something by the end of 2024, and but that whatever comes out of the process, for sure, it will not be the work of Stefano or someone else, like one single or a couple of individuals, smart, working in isolation and then coming out of the cave with a secret text to show the people adoring and saying, yes, that's it. We needed to build a coalition. We needed to build a very wide cast net of supporters from different parts of the ecosystem. At this point, when the open source definition came out, it was after 20-something years of free software practice. There were hundreds of packages available, dozens, hundreds of licenses already available. There was knowledge. It was just a matter of generalizing that practice and writing down the rules for open source, basically procurement from the Debian package. For the Debian project that later the Debian free software guidelines that later became the open source definition. So we didn't have neither time nor the other difference is in the late 80s or 90s when the free software and open source movement started, no one was paying attention. There were a few handful of smart people in the research labs or in their working in isolation. We had thousands of people already counting on open source, and so this definition needed to be a collaborative process. So what we did was to go and build that coalition, build that group, and we decided to use a process called co-design process, and that means designing with the subjects of who's going to be affected by the output of the process, and not for them. Right. So we reached out to lawyers, to developers of software, data scientists, to lawyers, to ethicists, philosophers, security experts from different parts of the world. We've done a very, very clear and intentional effort to have people from all sorts of the world involved. So we have hundreds of individuals and co-designers. We had 27 nationalities were represented in this work. 42% of them were people of color. 33% were from the global south. So it's been a very wide process and representative in the end, or at least we made the effort. Like, the intention was there. We got a grant from the Alfred Sloan Foundation to support also this work, and that we were grateful for it, because so that we can isolate a little bit from the big donations, which we have received also from Google, some money from Cisco, from Meta, from other corporations, but the largest chunk of this effort came from Sloan. And what we've done was we've split the process into chunks. Like, the first chunk was, what are the principles that we want to represent? And that was fairly easy, because we took the GNU Manifesto, we took the free software definition, and we said, can we apply the same principles to AI? And within a couple of sessions, within a couple of meetings, all thumbs up, easy to go. So we slightly rewrote the free software definition for software. We have changed a few terms, and we have written down what is an open source AI. And it's basically what you would expect. It's a system that is available with legal terms that grant you the freedom to use, study, modify, and share. Now, the next step was to complete this picture, because the free software definition, next to the freedom to study and the freedom to modify, the free software definition has another sentence. It says, access to source code is a precondition for this. And that's the nut of the problem. Like, what is the source code? Is there a source code of open source AI? Well, turns out that there is not a 101 reason, especially if we look at LLMs. Again, we were really focusing on, or in our mental map, generative AI, large language models, the transformers, fascination. Although neural networks also, we expanded in more general terms in computer vision during our analysis, but that would we were looking really at finding not the source code, because over time we have improved that. In fact, we have improved that understanding, even for software. Source code is the name, the title of the open source definition point 2. And definition point 2 says that source code clarifies it. Source code is the form available for which a developer would find it, the preferred form for which a developer would use to modify the software. That means that you cannot obfuscate your code and say that's the source. You cannot share it without telling me how you build it. You cannot, it doesn't count. If you just tell me a file in an obscure language and without telling me what compiler I should be using in order to build that package, right? It doesn't count, right? It's technically source code, but it's not the preferred form for making modifications to that package. And so we needed to complete our open source AI definition by finding the preferred form of making modifications to machine learning systems. And that's where we spend the largest amount of time and the largest amount of bits discussing what that means. And in order to find out, this is what we did. We said, okay, let's have a look at 4 systems and ask experts, like people who know how to build systems, to evaluate them and split them into components and tell us which of those components, in their opinion, are necessary, absolutely necessary to use, study, modify, and share. Let's rank them, get a little bit of a sense of what they were talking about. And that was the system analysis phase in our co-design process. We evaluated 4 of them. And they came up with an interesting, the phase resulted with basically a hypothesis. Like, if we don't get access to the full data set, then what came out of that discussion was that the ranking of the components, software components used to build the data set, were ranked much higher than the availability of the actual data sets. And I don't know how familiar you or your audience may be in the concept, the difference between data and data sets, or what is a data set in this context. Maybe we can get into the details later, but I finished the process description. So the software package were ranked a little bit higher. We knew that there was an issue with data because we learned it during the pre-learning phases. And so we said, okay, wait, let's put a pin on it. Let's see. Let's say that we don't require the actual data set, but instead we require the code that generated the data set. Then do we get a bycatch? Do we get, for example, systems that are absolutely proprietary? We know that they're not sharing enough. Like the scientific community is clearly rejecting them as open and not even open source, but then we did a validation phase. In this validation phase, we expanded the list of systems. We went to 12 or 13, and we asked different set of people, like, given this list of required components, go check each of these systems, find the components, find the conditions of their availability, and see if any of them complies with the open source definition. And we found out that the proprietary ones, clearly, like Meta's Llama, or Twitter or X at the time launched Grok, they were all absolutely, failing the definition. And the only one that would pass the definition were the systems that were developed by nonprofit organizations or scientific groups with no commercial interests, or clearly no commercial interests, like Eluther AI, LLM 360, the Allen Institute for AI. So these systems, they were passing the definition. Some of them made very good and reasonable attempt to release their data also. And so we're like, okay, this looks all right. So let's validate it. Let's iterate over this. And we started iterating. And in fact, we gathered a lot of support, sufficient support to say, look, the objections were reasonable, but they were also, were valid, but they were also not providing a solution. So it's like, this doesn't look too bad. It's not perfect. Like, we know we're probably going to have to throw it away, like any version 1. But let's call it version 1 and see where it goes. Yeah. And that's what we're doing.
Yeah, it's obviously an iterative process that you had to go through and learn as you go.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Daniel. I think I interrupted you, but
and this also makes me think about spam filtering. So, of course, you have like spam filtering software. Then you have a set of emails where you're learning it to be spam or ham, and then you have a trained spam filter, which you can then use on emails. And if you're going to modify anything, you don't need the original spam emails. You just need to modify the spam filter, basically. Is that a good understanding?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point because I almost forgot about it. But yes, Spam Assassin has been distributed by Debian for a long time, and you can happy to get Spam Assassin, but then you need to train it on your own data sets, right? You need to pass it your spams and your hams in order to have a personalized experience. Yeah. And if you want to change it, then you need to do more training with your data, not necessarily someone else's.
Yep.
That's a very good
So,
point.
yeah. So I think you're like, sorry if I'm jumping the gun. I may have interrupted you too, Stefano, but I know, like you said, the version 1.0 is out. I'll include the link in the OSR webpage. I think this was 1.0 was published like pretty recently, as we're recording this in December 2024. But and like you said, I mean, this is not like finished product. Like you're going to keep refining it, improving it over the next next few years. But so 1.0 is out, and I assume there are ways for, because I've seen like your public like discussion meetings, or you presented a number of conferences like FOSDEM and others. Like there'll be ways for people to sort of get involved in terms of helping you move to the next
Yes.
step, like whether it's 1.5 or 2.0. Like I don't know what your roadmap is, but yeah, if you can, I mean, sorry if I
Yeah.
cut you off, but if you can tell us more about how people can get engaged and
Yeah.
to looking at the 1.0 definition. So,
Yeah. No,
yeah.
absolutely. So let me start by
Mm,
telling what is this version 1.0, because I don't
mm,
think I have spelled it out. Version 1.0 basically says that an open source AI is one that gives you the four freedoms to use, study, modify, and share. And that means that you must have access to the model weights or parameters under a permissive license, an open source approved license. You need to have access to the code that generated the data set and the code that has been used to run the training. Basically, you need to be able to understand exactly how the whole system has been built. And then you need to have access to all the data that you can legally share, and either the data itself or the links to to where you got it from, basically. And that's it. It's very as you would expect. If the pipeline to build an AI like a large language models or a generative AI system requires the data, the original data, the training data requires the code for the training to create the data set, massaging it, the duplication and all the other funny tricks that data scientists do, and the training itself. And then you need to have the result of that training, the parameters, so that you can load them into the model and actually run inference with them. And that's it. And so the some people, I mean, we know that this is probably going to need to change, need to be adapted. There's been a lot of conversations. So we're going to be continuing to collect feedback on open source initiatives forums, at least for a while, and then we're designing. We're collecting feedback from other partners because we want to have a wider conversation for the next version. Let me talk about the difficult conversations we had and the feedback that we have received at the end, at the release. Mostly, we have received comments saying that we use the wrong term, that open source applied to AI is a misnomer and leads only to bad outcomes. And this is a fantastic comment. Like I really loved it, because from the very beginning, 3 years ago, I was already saying there is no source in AI because clearly it's not the same thing. So we've been struggling to think about a different term, and we tried to push other terms, but everyone really was highlighting how difficult that path was to create a new term when open source AI was already being used and popular. Because then if you want to call it something else, you have to do not only an education step for to introduce a new term, but also convince others not to use it. And you go and tell the European Commission that open source AI is a bad term, or you tell Meta that open source AI, they shouldn't be using it. It was a daunting task. So everyone was like, think about it, but that's not a good, it's a fair comment, but you cannot do it. But also the other reason that people were saying, it's not just that there is no source, but also there's no way of reproducing these large language models. So the fact that you have the build scripts, and in software, we're pushing towards the concept of reproducibility. If you use open source also for AI, you're basically creating another false analogy that may confuse people. Again, probably we have our hands tied unless we get really, the world changes in the next couple of years and the term open source AI gets abandoned. Then we're more than ready to abandon it ourselves. The other criticism is that I've seen this a few times, like the OSI should stick to software, stick to software, stick to software. Right, we could stick to software, and then open source AI will be defined by someone else. Well, I'm not going to go there, but open source AI defined by someone else. I don't know. Will that be more acceptable? And that someone else, if that someone else is Meta, or if that someone else is Amazon, or if that someone else is Microsoft, or anyone who has the power and or Adobe, to just do and say, yeah, this is it, and build a coalition around it of powerful corporations. The other thing that was actually interesting was that some, especially corporations at this stage, said, well, you know what, we did engage, we did follow, and in fact, there were OSPOs involved during the process. But towards the end, things got too fast and accelerated to the point where the people involved who had very much freedom from their corporation, from their corporate boss, to participating into giving feedback in the volunteer phase, they were not able to speak for the company when it came to say, yes, that is a good definition, we stand behind it. They were like, I didn't have the time to build the internal support to go and say, as a corporation, yes, we endorse this definition. So companies were basically excluded at the end, and they felt like that was not fair. And the other big criticism that continues today with always the same argument is that open data must be required. There is this I mentioned open source AI. AI is the parameters, the code, and the data. If the data is not open, then you don't have a way to rebuild, replicate, etc., etc., etc. And yes, that is it's the complicated issue. It's really complicated. Data is not software. It's not just copyright. There is a lot more complication behind it. And the important thing here is that no one else has solved this problem. No one not only solved, but not even proposed a different solution. Like the Software Freedom Conservancy, the Free Software Foundation, just before publishing the full publication of open source AI definition version 1.0, they came up with their positions, which are extremely well reasoned, and I appreciate their work. But at the same time, the Free Software Foundation is one of the interesting ones. It says basically that they're bending their principles to accept the fact that they say that if there is no open data in the pipeline, then the machine learning application is non-free, which for the Free Software Foundation, and I've been part of the Free Software Foundation Europe for many years, for the Free Software Foundation to say something that is non-free is also ethically wrong. In that article, the Free Software Foundation also says that we recognize that in some cases, like when you have medical AI or other data that cannot be shared legally or should not be shared, then it's ethically correct to use non-free machine learning applications. So they're bending their principles in order to fix, or in order to accommodate into this paradox, if you want, of open for AI.
Yeah.
And the software freedom conservancy, software freedom
I was going to
conservancy
say, I was going to say it's a difficult one, like because like I said, I haven't like followed it that closely, but I was assuming for privacy concerns and others, data would be a very difficult problem to crack. Is what I was saying, but I think I interrupted you, Stefano. But
no, privacy is one, but there is also copyright. I'll tell you a story.
Yeah.
The other thing is the software freedom conservancy made a similar argument. Like, no, you need to be aspirational. You need to push for open data. I'm like, yeah, fine. But in the end, Bradley Kuhn is not smart, and he said, I don't know for sure how to respect user rights, etc. It will probably take 15 years. All right. Well, we don't have 15 years. It's
right.
And you know, the proposal that we have put into 1.0 actually, it seems to be working. Like I mean, I think we need to give it a chance to prove itself wrong, because right now, really none of the proprietary systems pass the validation bar. It's really only the ones who actually make an attempt. And I say that make an attempt to release the data, not release the data, because one of the triggers of the problem with forcing open data happened during at the beginning of this year, when so one of the most open systems is developed by a collective of hackers, fundamentally, called Eleuther AI. They assembled a very large data set of text during the pandemic. They didn't think about it too much. They were like having fun and trying to beat or replicate ChatGPT or OpenAI's GPT-2 or 3, I don't remember. But one of the early ones, they were like, oh my God, we have nothing to do. We're in the pandemic. This system is cool. Maybe we can do something with it. So they tried to replicate it. And their system is called Pythia. And Pythia is trained on a data set called the Bile. And at the beginning of the year, they're so open, they tell you exactly what kind of data sets, which content they have used to build the data set. And they received a couple lawsuits and takedown requests for the MCA violation. Now, the MCA violations in the United States, we learned that in Japan has a different law that says that the sources of data that they have used are probably not illegal. So immediately it was clear at the beginning of the year that if you force that, it must be open data, then you need to be putting a very big question mark, according to which legislation. It gets complicated. Right. Then the system analysis phase gave us a path, like a suggestion, like, oh my God, maybe we fix it by saying, give us the URL, and not the URL of all the individual data sets or the individual pieces of content, but also the scripts that create the data set, create the tokens, et cetera, et cetera. Like, maybe that's a path to solve this issue. Boom. It looks like it's working. It's, let's give it a chance. Let's see if it works.
No, I think, as you mentioned, this is like software. This is version 1.0. It's, you're not stopping here. So I'll definitely put a link on the episode description. And Stefano, if you want to provide a link to me, I'll post it as well on how people can get involved in future discussions. And I mean, I really appreciate your spirit of openness and describing not only the details of how the sausage was made, but some of the challenges and criticism that you face. And so I think hopefully people will appreciate the amount of effort that you put in, and the amount of challenges that you're facing and will probably continue to face. And why this isn't a simple exercise as saying, you need to meet these 4 criteria.
Yeah.
to meet the definition. And even the terminology, like you were saying, like open source AI was, used by various people and created a lot of, I think, misconceptions among a lot of people. And
Yeah.
that
Hey,
unfortunately,
OpenAI
yeah,
was taken.
yeah. So it just leads to a lot more complexity. So cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, thank you for all of this. And we have a tradition in our podcast. I think you're our first guest that we have from Italy. I mean, Italy is a very popular destination for a lot of tourists and even for business folks to travel. But do you want to share something with our listeners about like Italy that a lot of people may not know about? Yeah,
I'm full of those.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, I could talk about the weird rowing in Venice or the
yeah.
weird sailing in Venice. But actually, gonna mention a very very obscure fact. Like I'm sure you're familiar with the legends of King Arthur's and
Yeah,
Lancelot and the Round Table and the Sword in the Stone, right?
yeah.
And where do you play? Where is the Sword in the Stone? Do you know?
No, no. Daniel, do you
Is
know?
it?
Or like,
Was it somewhere in Africa?
No, it's actually near Siena.
oh wow.
There is actually the Sword in the Stone. The origin of the legend is it's a Christian legend actually. So
Mhm.
it started with this knight called San. Now it's a saint, Galgano, and he apparently was struck by lightning or like a voice told him to stop going around and killing people and drop his stones, drop his sword. So that's what he did. He dropped it into the ground. The ground solidified around it, and he went from being a knight going around killing people into a hermit. And he died on those hills. And the hermit actually had a cast of followers who wanted to know more about it, and the whole place became a place of pilgrimage, and it's very close to the Via Francigena, which is the road that took the people from the north, like France, to southern Italy to embark for the Crusades. So on the way back, coming back to and pay the homages to the kings of France, they were also bringing the legend of the Sword in the Stone, and that's where things probably took on.
Cool. All right. So it's like a new trivia about the area near Siena, I guess. That's cool.
Yep,
Like I didn't know that either. So
yep, and it's very close to
uh,
another famous place which is
mhm.
where Dante played the entrance to hell.
Oh, nice. Cool. All right.
Yeah. So
Well,
if you go
yeah,
there, you can
yeah.
see the entrance to hell and the Sword in the Stone.
Right. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. Love it. I mean, it's not the usual touristy stuff that you hear about Italy. So that's
Off
great.
to bring the
So
track, yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
All right. All right. Well, thanks for being on joining us for this episode, Stefano. And yeah, hopefully people will sort of take a look at not just the current definition, but hopefully maybe some of them may be interested in getting involved in the future. So
Absolutely. So follow
yeah,
follow the forums. You can
yeah,
support the open source initiative by becoming a member. By becoming a member, you also can you can vote for electing a third of the board, and but you can also run yourself as a board director. We're a
cool.
very open
All right.
organization.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right. Well,
Cheers.
thanks for
Thank you.
joining late in Italy on Friday evening, and hope we'll see you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thanks
Ciao.
for having me. Bye bye.
Thank you.